embarrassingly, comically misogynistic lines in this book that I think I will still be thinking about 30 years from now. Often called cottagecore horror. Everyone else is just kind of waiting for them to make up and make out already. Find something you love and feel big feelings about it, okay? Hey y'all, I'm Cece, and today I am here to review some books. You all thought I disappeared again, didn't you? Look, someday the heavens will align and I will gain all the executive function necessary to manage my life. And by the heavens aligning, I do mean finally being prescribed the correct cocktail of medications that makes the serotonin and the dopamine in my brain work. So I have some books to talk about that I read at the end of 2024. There are 11 books total that I read in November and December. Yes, it is March. It took me a long time to organize my thoughts. I'm hoping my January-February wrap-up will be posted sometime before May, but no promises. So that is 11 books finished across November and December, which makes for a total of about 3,011 pages, I believe, according to Storygraph editions, because most of the books that I read over these 2 months were digital, and I got them from my local library. The only physical book that I read was Fever Dream, and I will talk about that, but I read it at the very end of December. So some stats for this month. As far as age group, I have 8 books that were adult releases and 3 books that were YA. My most represented genre, by far, is horror, with some truly fascinating subgenres we'll get into. But I have 6 horror books. 3 of these were romance. I have 1 thriller and then 1 fantasy. Other things. 3 of these books are novellas. I also have 1 graphic novel, and 1 of these is a short story collection. 2 of these books were translated from their original language into English. See the stats here for 7 of these books feature LGBTQIA+ narrators. And then 5 of these books are by authors I have read from before. 5 of them were by authors that were new to me, and the story collection was a mix of the 2. I'm just gonna tackle these in the order that I read them, but I would settle in with your cozy drink, or some snacks, or a phone game, or whatever, I don't know your process. I'd settle in for some odd genre shifts, because I was balancing out my super scary books by spacing them between queer holiday romances. It's an eclectic mix, but it's my mix. If you like this video and want to see more from me, consider liking and subscribing to my channel, Problems of a Book Nerd, and I would absolutely love it if you open up the description to check for links to my print shop and my socials and all that stuff. Okay, with intro business covered, let's get into the books, and I want to start out by talking about Summer Suns by Lee Mandello. Summer Suns is a sweltering Southern Gothic that I have been excited for since it was announced, basically, but it has become increasingly embarrassing to me over the years that my highly rated review of this book on Goodreads is still just a reaction to the announcement of the book and not a review with any substance in it. So hello, here's my attempt to fix that. I'm finally reviewing the book. This is about Andrew, whose life has been built up to this point pretty much around his best friend and closest person, Eddie. Their bond goes beyond definition, which is why Andrew is shocked and horrified when he gets the news that Eddie has apparently killed himself only a few days before Andrew was going to move in to their shared home together for grad school. So despite never being apart for most of their lives, the 6 months leading up to Eddie's death were extremely different. Eddie pushed Andrew away. He said he wanted time to make the house perfect for the 2 of them. So now that Eddie is gone, Andrew is just consumed with questions of what has been going on for the last 6 months, and if there were times he should have pushed harder against Eddie's drifting. Andrew is angry and grieving and being slightly haunted, but he's kind of trying to avoid thinking about that, which is going to be a key character theme. Remember this one later on. So he's being haunted by a ghost that he refuses to recognize, that he's trying not to think about, and so Andrew builds his life around getting answers about Eddie. Instead, he meets the roommate Eddie picked out for the 2 of them. He sees the house that Eddie has filled with things that were clearly meant for the 2 of them to spend their lives there together. He also finds out that Eddie has spent the last 6 months investigating the thing that Andrew never would. Their shared traumatic history and the unexplainable power that has been there ever since. But if digging into Eddie's Southern Gothic bullshit is what gets Andrew answers, then that is exactly what he'll do, and he'll meet Eddie's new friends, his rambunctious, intense, sharp as a knife new friends, who allow Andrew to indulge in drinking and drugs and the adrenaline of covert street racing. I've moved my rating of this one up and down a few times since reading it, because I remain just as indecisive now about how I feel regarding this book as I felt the whole time I was reading it. Here's the thing. I feel like I know these characters in their bones. They're toxic and self-destructive and angry and resentful, but they're so three-dimensional they feel realer than most other characters I've ever read about. Andrew, in particular, is going to live in my mind forever as the reigning king of repression. Truly gobsmacking stuff. But on top of all of their flaws, Andrew and his new group of friends, maybe, have a particular intimacy that's just really compelling and also something that Andrew hasn't ever experienced before. Someone giving him a hug because he's sad. That's new. Someone making sure that he eats regularly. That's new. There's a realness to it that really affected me, even if it also sometimes baffled me. In my last wrap-up, I reviewed Lee's novella Feed Them Silence, and my overall takeaway was that it was perfect for readers who like to take their favorite mentally ill character and put them in a jar to shake it around and then see what happens. I think that might also be true about this book. I do also think it might be true that people who were fans of the drugged-up dreaming sequence in The Dream Thieves would be fans of this book. Connected to those thoughts, though, I want to say that this is more of a vibes book than a plot book. This book is a Pinterest board. Like, I see it. Sweaty boys in cars at night. Cigarettes. Chunky books and images with a ghostly overlay. I see it. I'm there. And a book being just vibes isn't bad, especially when it's as well written as this book is. I do feel like it was lacking in the plot department. I remember reading this book, getting to the 70-75% mark, and having the thought, what is this about, though? I was enjoying the vibe so much I forgot there was supposed to be a plot. But pushing the plot for so long, for all the Southern Gothic cursed queer repression stuff, it just made it feel odd pacing-wise. Andrew, as we've said, is the reigning king of repression, and the fact that he has a tendency to just walk away from his problems is a reason why it's harder to move the needle on the plot. When I finished this book, I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. It then went down to a 3 because I just couldn't hack it in my brain. Then I started reading other books, and it was like going from a Best Original Screenplay winner to a B movie. In comparison to the characters in Summer Sons, every other character I was reading about felt like a sketch instead of a person. And I think that that's a deeply powerful thing about this book and about the writing, even if I don't fully understand all the emotions it makes me feel. I'm not a person who remembers a lot of, like, quotes from the things I like without outside reinforcement, I guess. But there are a couple of lines in this book that I think I will still be thinking about 30 years from now, word for word. Like, jaw-dropping stuff. I think ultimately this might be a messy, angry book because grief is a messy, angry emotion. The plot is directionless because Andrew is unmoored without Eddie. He doesn't have anyone to point him in the right direction and then push, so we're left floundering along with him. Even writing the notes for this review, I felt divided on what to rate it. Currently, it is sitting at a 4 out of 5 stars. I'm fascinated by Lee's writing and his characters, and God, if this book doesn't make me feel so many things. I think it just might be a feature or a flaw, depending on who you are as a reader, that I'll still be trying to figure out how I feel about his books a decade after I finish reading them. Next up, I want to talk about a pretty big release from last year, and that is I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. This is, and I truly hesitate to use this word, historical horror, as it is set in 1989. We are in La Mesa, Texas, and we are following a character named Tolly Driver. We're actually meant to be reading his autobiography, and what he is telling us is the story of how he was cursed to kill for revenge. So this is not surprising in the least, coming from Stephen Graham Jones, but what a fucking distinct voice this book has. Oh my god. Stylistically, it's very like train of thought, stream of consciousness, which makes me feel like this would work particularly well for audiobook readers. I gave the audiobook a try, but I still struggle with audio processing. But the narrator had a great voice that really set the tone, and I kept thinking of his voice as I was going through the rest of the book. I can already tell from reviews that people are on kind of a love it, hate it basis when it comes to that narration style, but I'm gonna say I fall on the side of this worked for me. I think it could have worked a little bit better if I had had the ability to just sit down and read the book in one go. Because I was only reading it in little slivers at a time, I would sometimes find myself getting lost in Tolly's story and the various tangents that he had gone down, so it just led to a lot of rereading and this book taking a little longer for me to finish than it usually does for me to finish a book of this size. Anyway, Tolly has such a clear voice and a sense of humor. He's trying to tell a story, but he gets in his own way. He gets distracted, or he doesn't want to tell you the next part of the story, so he'll spend more pages than necessary describing his life, his best friend, his father's death, in general, his time before becoming a teenage slasher. Tolly doesn't delight in violence, he's just a random high schooler who doesn't even really like horror movies, but he lived through something horrible and he has to tell someone. I will say, since I mentioned violence, that the violence in this book it's overwhelming and deeply effective. This is an emotional story. It's about a person becoming someone he does not want to be. So a good chunk of the book is focused on Tolly, how he's feeling, how he felt, and he plays it off with humor, but there's a real darkness to the fact that Tolly is playing a part, that he isn't in control, and that's horrifying. But all of that makes the slasher scenes... Oh, I broke my little ring. I have a backup. That makes all the hyper-violent slasher scenes feel even more visceral and bloody because of how intense the tone shift is. So on the one hand, I can say that that means this book was less creepy, I guess, than most horror I read. But on the other hand, as someone who normally has pretty chill reactions to gore, there was a scene in this book that made me gag in real life. And I don't know if that's ever happened before, and a good deal of that is in the power of Stephen's writing, but a lot of it is also in his power to control those tone shifts. It's a difficult road to walk, but it's done exceptionally well, which again isn't a surprise. We love Stephen Graham Jones on this channel. I hope you know that. I don't know if my reading vlog for this book will ever see the light of day, but I spent a lot of my reading experience talking about how much I love meta horror, and how much this book succeeds on that level. It was heartbreaking and raw and rewarding and clever, especially because I have a love for slashers that Stephen Graham Jones clearly shares. Cabin in the Woods is one of my favorite horror movies of all time because it takes the things I love and makes them into something new. I think it summons that feeling of playing pretend when you were a kid, like you're in a big round of and then, but it's the best way possible because the person who is playing with me is infinitely better at creating stories out of the things we both love. This was Stephen Graham Jones' sandbox, and it was such a delightful reinvention. God, I love how art inspires so much emotion that it makes other people create art. It's something so special. Find something you love and feel big feelings about it, okay? So one of the tells for how much I'm enjoying a book is how much I share with Brian, my bestie, my roommate. I was pausing to tell him more every other page. I was updating my sister on random aspects of the plot. People who have never heard of this book and are never going to read it know details about the lore because I had to keep discussing it even when I wasn't reading the book. Basically, I'm saying I felt so many emotions about a piece of art that it inspired me to make my own thing to share those big feelings that it inspired. So that's kind of cyclical and nice. And you know what? I really didn't get it going in how so many reviewers were talking about how this was going to be an emotional book. How are people getting emotional over this faux autobiographical slasher novel? But I was right there with them. I was just as consumed by the tragedy as everyone else seems to be, and it was just a really impressive book and a really unique read. I would love to see the physical copy of this book because there were notes about like certain typefaces used, and I lose that in the digital version, I'll admit. I want to see the physical copy. I'm so curious. I think when I finished this book, I gave it 4 stars, but since then, I've just felt better and better about it as a reading experience, as a story, as a piece of writing, so I knocked my rating up to 4.5 stars. I feel like it changed the way I watch slashers, and I can't think of a higher piece of praise than that for me. Speaking of slashers, I wonder if I was on a kick. The next book I want to talk about is called Slasher Girls and Monster Boys, and it is edited by April Genevieve Tucholke. This is a YA horror short story collection, and the kind of like gimmick of the collection, I guess, is that each story has a couple of pieces of inspiration, and those inspiration are famous pieces of media. For example, the first story, The Birds of Azalea Street by Novaran Suma, says that it takes inspiration from Hitchcock's Rear Window, as well as his movie The Birds. Some of the stories had songs that they were inspired by. I think one had a TV show. There should be a link in the description to my full review of this story collection, where I kind of give mini reviews for each story and rate each story individually. If you're interested in that, link down in the description. I'm going to give you kind of my overview of the collection. I mean, I guess I could save time and just say my overview is that this was average. It has some great stories, it has some bad stories, and it has a bunch that are right in the middle. I already mentioned the first story by Novaran Suma. It was a brilliant introduction to the collection. Part of why I read story collections is to find new authors that I'm curious about, and immediately added some of Nova's books to my TBR because that story was fabulous. Also, that story had a nice thematic connection to the concluding story, which I thought made for a nice little arc in the collection, and I think that that's just a credit to the editor and organizing things in a nice order. My favorites in this collection were Hide and Seek by Megan Shepherd and Stitches by A.G. Howard, and then my least favorite was a story called Fat Girl with a Knife by Jonathan Mayberry, which I feel was, like, embarrassingly comically misogynistic, but I don't know if this is fair, but it was the embodiment of my every complaint about when old cis men try to write teenage girls. The male gaze of it all. The way that her relationship with her body was written, just one of those things. You know the, she breasted boobily down the stairs as a stand-in? That's kind of what this story was giving to me. Also, I think it was straight up badly written. There was one line in the story that made me laugh out loud because it felt like a placeholder for a coherent sentence that never got written. That is around the point where I found myself remembering that I had DNF'd a book by Jonathan Mayberry. I believe it was called Rot and Ruin years ago. So I think it's safe to say that maybe his writing is not for me. The stories I loved, Hide and Seek and Stitches, share the fact that they have really fascinating world building and mythology. Stitches also has a leg up on everybody else because one of its sources of inspiration is Frankenstein, and I'm always a sucker for anything Frankenstein. Hide and Seek is about Appalachian folklore and making a deal with, or perhaps running from, death. And Stitches is about a girl who is rebuilding her father, let's say. Also, I have something in my notes that I just like to read word for word. This was the quick summary that I wrote immediately after finishing the story so that I would remember what it was about later, like non-spoilery. Exact quote: "Gross medical body trauma and girls with an iron will to protect their family." Could not possibly ask for more. So I did super love the use of, like, books and movies and songs as a source of inspiration. I did really like that kind of gimmick behind the collection. It made the whole reading experience fun. If a story was ever inspired by a song, I would go and listen to that song before I read the story, and it was kind of a fun new way to discover new media. I did not go and watch any of the movies that I had not already seen, but I had time to listen to some new songs, and it was cool to get some recommendations and to see a bunch of unique media paired together. Like, again, I'm so fascinated by art and how it inspires all of these different emotions in people, so. But I also think that this was kind of a take it or leave it collection, so if you're okay with reading a bunch of so-so stories in the pursuit of finding a couple of great ones, then I would recommend Slasher Girls and Monster Boys. But if you need your collections to be all winners, this this did not work on that level for me. I wound up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. So it's time for our first very dramatic tone shift. We're here for the first queer holiday romance. That book is Second Chances in Newport Stephen by TJ Alexander. This is a rom-com where one of the main characters is a professional comedy writer, so I think that sets kind of a high bar for the com half of the genre. However, I am pleased to say that I laughed all the way through this one, and it also just captured the really sweet romance of two people who came out after high school. So many queer people don't get to really live their adolescence because they spent all of that time hiding or playing a part. It just means that a lot of queer people experience a kind of second adolescence. Like, your emotions are giving you the chance to feel them how you used to feel them because now you can feel them freely. I don't know, this is not an uncommon queer experience. It happened for me in college. So, I still haven't even told you guys what this book is about. Let me get to that. So, Eli is a trans guy who is headed back to his parents' home for the holidays. What Eli doesn't tell his family about this visit is that it might be longer than a visit because he just lost his long-term writing job, and now his big comedy dreams are feeling more impossible than ever. While Eli is back in his hometown, he happens to run into Nick, his childhood best friend and high school sweetheart, who is still in their same hometown running a local restaurant. The two of them dated prior to Eli's transition, and they haven't seen each other in years. Nick has been through a marriage and a divorce since high school, and he has a young daughter that he absolutely adores. Nick was also pretty sure he was straight right up until the moment that he met Eli properly for the first time. Like I said, this book is about capturing a feeling. The feeling of being young and really in love with someone. That's what I was getting at with this whole second adolescence thing. I've seen some reviews that say that these two seemed immature for being in their late 30s, and I just wanted to give my take on that. Yeah, there were times when even I was like, boys, just talk to each other. But that's kind of the point. Like, the spark is still there, but you're getting to know someone again, and you're getting to feel new feelings and not be afraid when those feelings pop up. You don't have to spend time desperately hiding anything. And I think there's something that's just really sweet about these two finding their way back to each other. Something that I've noticed about TJ Alexander's writing is that they write trans characters experiencing joy and feeling sexy and unsure and falling in love, but they don't write those characters into a fantasy world that is exempt from transphobia. I read Chef's Kiss also last year, and while it was a charming culinary romance with a non-binary love interest, it also very much dealt with homophobia and transphobia in the workplace, from bosses, from co-workers. Eli is a trans man visiting his parents in a very, very red state, and the book doesn't shy away from the fact that that makes him feel less safe, less supported. But also, he's made it this far in life through humor and sheer will, and that's not going to stop anytime soon. While this book did focus more on Eli, there were POV chapters from Nick's perspective. I love him. I'm obsessed with how he deals with his sexuality crisis, which is to not have one, just to leap directly over the gay panic portion of the experience. He doesn't rush to define it, he just is immediately open to learning new things about himself. Nick is also demisexual, which is pretty minor in terms of the story, but it's another thing that he just kind of takes in stride, and I love that for him. I had fun with this one. I really loved Eli and Nick and their whole extended collection of friends and family, particularly Nick's daughter, and also Eli being so overwhelmed because Nick is now giving hot dad energy. Understandable. I wound up giving this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I want to talk about a book called Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. This is a quick, gorgeously dark novella that is often called cottagecore horror. And I'm not going to tell you too much about it because it works best going in not knowing a lot and letting it just unfold in front of you. It's definitely a tease of a book. It's one that will make you desperate for the author to just tell you what's going on, which is intoxicating to me. But I loved it. The other thing that was intoxicating to me is how much this book was in dialogue with Gone Girl, and in particular the Gone Girl, like, cool girl monologue. I was writing essays in my notes. If I had a physical copy, it would be covered in post-its. Like, it would be embarrassing. There was just already so much in this book going on about, like, the people we pretend to be to please those around us. And then during a school event, someone literally performs the cool girl monologue. And it was at that point that I wanted to start printing out the pages so that I could chew on them, because that was the only way that was going to scratch the itch in my brain. This book was so perfect for me. So, this book is about Ro. She is a literature professor who meets a magnetic woman named Ash at a local farmer's market and realizes she must like girls because she would do anything and everything for this woman. Ash makes soap and candles and beautiful jars of preservatives. Ro grows obsessed. And that obsession may be leading her somewhere darker than she thinks. I know I already said I wish I had a physical copy, and I do, because I have so many favorite lines and thoughts that I need to write down. But I will say it was actually super helpful to read this digitally the first time, if only for, like, the vocab lesson. On Libby, you can, like, press and hold or long press on a word to get the definition, and I used that feature so many times over the course of reading Bloom that the next time I read a physical book, I tried to long press a piece of paper to get the definition of the word. Ro is obsessed with words, and she has this seemingly endless well of perfect prose, which makes her a brilliant narrator. I think I highlighted half of my ebook. Any words I say about the writing in this book, how lush it is, how evocative it is, please know that it's more lush and more evocative than that. The word that comes to mind when it comes to a story like this is delectable, because there's just nothing about the reading experience that I didn't enjoy. It was deliciously unnerving, like a melting oil painting of two women in bed together. Just fantastic. Even if I did guess where we were headed, it swallowed me whole. Delilah S. Dawson has my fucking number, and I'm okay with that. What do I need to read next, okay? What I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. It'll probably be 5 stars when I reread it, so where am I going? Guillotine, incredible. Bloom, amazing. Any other single name titles I should go for? So next I want to talk about Fly With Me by Andy Burke. This is a Sapphic fake dating romance with some more intense, like, family medical drama going on in both the main character and love interest's lives, so be aware of that. I did end up crying through a part of this book. However, I was on a plane at the time, and I consider that grading on a curve. Like, gum could make me cry when I'm on an airplane. So this book is about Olive. She is a nurse who is terrified of flying, who has to navigate a medical emergency during the first few minutes of her flight. Ultimately, she saves the passenger. Unfortunately, the plane touches back down. It's not making it to Orlando, and neither is Olive, and she needs to be there for the marathon that she is running in her brother's honor the following morning. Olive gets an unexpectedly generous offer from the gorgeous co-pilot Stella, and the two of them wind up spending a whirlwind day together, driving to Orlando, and then the rest of the news drops. The footage of Olive saving that guy on the plane has gone viral, and now Stella has another offer. This video is the perfect chance for her to finally stand out amidst the horde of white male pilots, if it's played the right way. So the two of them should pretend to date, take advantage of the publicity, and attend a few company events together so that Stella can get the recognition she needs to finally become a pilot, and Olive can hopefully raise some money for her hospital. I literally read 2 books in December that were about Sapphic's fake dating to get a job during Christmas. Both have song lyric titles. It's very much a 2 nickels situation. We'll get to make my wish come true in a bit, but you know? So the pro-con situation with this book is that it's very sweet, and it gets into some really complex emotional relationships when it comes to the physical and mental health of family members. However, the book is too long, and it suffers from not having Stella's point of view. Like, that might be a personal thing, but I just feel like I didn't know her at all. She has a tendency to be a very reserved person, so when we're not getting chapters from her perspective, it just means it's a little harder to get a feel for the character. Also, the entire Toxic X storyline, I would have cut it. Because I hated it. It felt childish and frustrating, especially when Olive was dealing with such huge emotional stakes. Like, Olive is dealing with being estranged from her family, and she's mourning her brother because she's the only one in her family who seems to understand what the words brain dead mean. That is so big. That is so serious. So every time the ex showed up with her whole, like, I'm gonna cyberstalk you so I can still make you feel like shit even when we're not together anymore. It was so annoying. Truly just spent the time being like, can you be an adult? How are these your priorities? Olive is just a really lovely character. I felt so much sympathy and anxiety for her for this entire book, and I think that that also impacted, like, why I especially hated the Toxic X storyline. I was too busy living in my dream world where I got to wrap Olive up in, like, a blanket and give her a hug. It's like, how do you have time to be mean to her? Also, Stella is literally my queen for showing up to her fake dating proposal with a fully prepared color-coded binder. Any potential questions, information, a guide on PDA. Leslie no-bass preparation skills, and I could not get over it for the entire book. I did really like these two as a couple, and I thought this book was sweet, but it kind of fades in between all of the other romances that I read last year. I wound up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I would love to hear what other people thought about this one, because I really did like a lot of this book. I just feel like it needed to be tweaked. Moving on back to horror, let's talk about The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher. I read What Moves the Dead early last year, and I loved it. It had a great mix of, like, gothic atmosphere, memorable world building, and a sense of humor. And I've heard that that is kind of T. Kingfisher's thing, so I wanted to explore more of her work. I enjoyed this book so much. This is another one that I could not stop talking about to the people in my life. It was like I was doing a SparkNotes version of the book for my family. I wanted them to know all of the details so that we could discuss what was going on and theorize. It was just so unique that I couldn't leave it behind when I closed the app. I had to have more. I had to keep discussing it. And in the weeks that followed me reading this book, Brian and I watched multiple movies that have prompted one or both of us to go, hey, it's like your book, because it was so central to our conversations up to that point. This book follows Kara, sometimes nicknamed Carrot. She is fresh off a divorce and looking for someplace to stay while she wallows and gets back on her feet, and then she gets a call from her lovably eccentric uncle. Her uncle owns a kitschy museum of wonders, and he's hoping that someone could lend him a hand for the next few weeks. The museum is mostly full of odds and ends and other random stuff, but there's also a lot of taxidermy. And when Kara gets there, she gets right to work cataloging the museum, because that is not something that's ever been done. She also reconnects with Simon, the barista from the coffee shop next door, and their shared sense of humor just makes them instant friends. So when Kara finds a hole in the wall on the second floor of the museum that leads to a bunker that is far too big to exist in the space it occupies, she asks Simon for help in exploring it further. Then they find a painted warning on the walls that says, "Pray they are hungry." And then they find the stairs. So this is an interdimensional horror adventure, I would say. And one of my absolute favorite aspects of it was how much this was a work the problem book. One of my favorite things in fiction is competent characters working together to achieve an impossible goal. It's why I love Star Trek, it's why I love heist movies, it's why I love big rescue mission movies like The Martian or Apollo 13. Simon and Kara are presented with a situation that makes no logical sense, but they have to work the problem anyway. They were asking the questions that I would ask, doing their best in an insane situation, like, okay, if we are in an impossible other world, why is this terrifying message written in English that we can understand? Or I would have the thought, this is kind of like The Magician's Nephew, and then Kara would ask Simon, hey, did you ever read the Narnia books? Because she'd had the same thought and wanted to use that, like, shared understanding as a framework to build on for whatever weird shit her and Simon were caught in. So maybe this isn't quite about competence, because Kara and Simon are in no way experts at dealing with interdimensional monsters, but it's more about being able to approach the situation logically. That is something that was also really present in What Moves the Dead. Work together and figure it out. Like, yes. Another thing that just connected me to the characters right away was their sense of humor and how they used it to cope with their absolutely horrifying situation. There was this unspoken agreement between the two of them that only one could freak out at a time, so the other would usually try to inject some levity into the existential nightmare. Again, just something I find very real-world relatable, something that I would do and have done in emergency situations. And something that I found in both of Kingfisher's books that I've read so far is logical approaches to the horrors, humor to break the tension. That's a pretty good pairing for me. I also love how often Kara uses fanfiction as a coping skill for, like, every situation. Need to distract yourself from the incomprehensible fear and trauma? Fanfiction. Need to specifically focus on something that is not terrifying monsters for the next 5 minutes? Think about the most frustrating fanfiction argument you ever got into. The comment. The one that really got under your skin. I think that the main issue of this book comes down to pacing. It just felt uneven. I went into this book basically knowing nothing, and I would regularly check the percentage point I was at to see if it would give me additional insight into where the story could possibly go, and it never helped, not one time. There was one specific part where I felt like the book was ending, we were wrapping up, and I was like, oh, cool, and I checked the percentage, and I had 30% of the book left. Sometimes the book would be terrifying and horrific, and I would be, like, flipping through pages as quickly as I possibly could, and then other times it would just sort of lull. It's just certainly not the clean, rising arc of tension. Things were broken up in a way that felt odd and disconnected. I just wanted to have the same level of, like, attention and passion for the entire book, and there were definitely moments where my attention was waning. However, all that being said, I still had an incredible reading experience just exploring this book, and I feel like I 100% got what I wanted in exploring more of Kingfisher's books. It seems like maybe T. Kingfisher is an author for me. I know she has kind of an overwhelming backlist of titles, so I would love to hear which ones y'all recommend. What should I prioritize first? I know some of her books lean more into fantasy than I've really been reading lately, but the humor and the charm of Kingfisher's characters makes me feel like there's just a lot there for me to love. I wound up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. Such a wild roller coaster. I cannot wait to see where I go next with T. Kingfisher. Next up, I want to talk about Make My Wish Come True by Alison Derrick and Rachel Lippincott. We have made it to the second Sapphic fake dating to get a job holiday romance with an emotional karaoke scene and a title that's a song lyric. So, Make My Wish Come True is about Caroline and Arden, ex-best friends from the same small Christmas-obsessed town in Pennsylvania. Their friendship ended when Arden left years ago to seriously pursue acting and basically cut all of her personal ties. Now, Arden is a huge star with a bad reputation, and Caroline is wrapping up her senior year of high school, trying to put together the perfect journalism portfolio for college applications. When Arden is presented with a potential dream role, she tells the director during her audition that she has the small-town roots that make her perfect for the job, and then her manager tacks on that she even has a great girlfriend back home, just to polish off that shiny new image. Now Arden has to convince the best friend she hasn't seen in years, who hates her, to pretend to be her girlfriend for December, and write the manufactured story of their romance that gets Arden the job and Caroline the perfect portfolio piece. I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like nothing makes me sound more insane and incoherent than explaining the plot of fake dating books. This was easily the summary that I spent the most time, like, tweaking and trying to formulate. And that is on a list of really weird books. I just feel like the motivations for fake dating are usually so convoluted. And then on top of that, this is a very short book with a very large cast of characters. It's just a lot to take in for a YA contemporary. Caroline in particular had so many siblings and friends that it did take me a while to get all of them in order. I was confused for a while there. I think it's beyond sweet that Alison Derrick and Rachel Lippincott are married to each other, and they write best-selling romances about girls falling in love. Like, it's the kind of thing that makes my heart grow 3 sizes whenever I think about it. We're just getting dangerous now. I think that Arden and Caroline have really great chemistry, and I just have a tendency to prefer friends to lovers romances, and the fact that this had that, plus the angst of their relationship having, like, broken off really roughly, it's very much my thing. If you're after a cheesy Hallmark movie-esque romance that will make you grin to yourself the whole time you're reading it, this is a pretty good choice. I do want to specify that this is a Christmas book and a Hanukkah book. Caroline is often frustrated by the fact that her hometown is so obsessed with celebrating half of her life that she's surrounded by Christian imagery constantly and told that it's secular, all while Jewish traditions are completely absent. It's a difficult thing to reckon with, and I think it makes for a really emotionally complex storyline to navigate in the middle of a really sweet romance. Arden's relationship with her bad girl image, while I was interested in it, it really isn't written as deeply as I would have liked. We're supposed to believe that Arden is struggling with the fact that she's become who she was pretending to be, this crazy party girl. But we only see that version of her at the very beginning of the book. The main thing she deals with is that there's a wall that she's built around herself to protect herself, and clearly she started building that wall long before she left Pennsylvania. There's a growing realization that maybe she's been manipulated by the industry, or that the people around her whose jobs depend on her career might not have her best interests at heart. But with all that complexity, it just never really seems like she became that party girl. We're just supposed to believe that that's something that happened. Oh, I do agree with a couple of reviews that I saw that questioned how much this counted as fake dating, considering how many people were in the know. Like, most fake dating tropes revolve around the idea of, like, ooh, how will we convince them that we're in love? But most of the people in the girls' lives know already, like siblings, parents, friends, all in the know. It starts to give the book an almost Much Ado About Nothing feel, which I am not complaining about, to be clear. But, like, arguably the only 2 people who think that Caroline and Arden's relationship is fake are Caroline and Arden. And everyone else is just kind of waiting for them to make up and make out already. Except for Caroline's high school crush, who truly belongs on a list of, like, rom-com love interests most wronged, with the most horrendous luck. I'm so sorry, girl. There was a lot to love about this, particularly the big community vibes of Barnwich. It made me so very nostalgic for the big Christmas markets that I used to attend with my college girlfriend's family back in Pennsylvania. Like, I'm a West Coast girly now, but there truly is something special about an East Coast Christmas. I think most of my issues with this book come down to the page count. I think the story just needed a little bit more room to breathe. But I did truly adore this setting and this big extended family surrounding Caroline and Arden while they're fighting and flirting. And truly, when there was a karaoke scene in this book, I felt like I was losing it. Like, everything was lining up. I gave this book 3.75 out of 5 stars because I'm obnoxious. And apparently that was just as decisive as I could get. Next up, I want to talk about another novella, and that is The Night of Baba Yaga. This is by Akira Otani, and it was translated by Sam Bett. So this is a woman. So this book is about a woman named Yoriko Shindo, and she is a mixed-race martial arts fighter who has just been kidnapped by the gang of a man who has, like, a very high position of power within the Yakuza. Shindo is described as a workhouse of a woman, someone who has always felt like an outcast. And she is beaten nearly to death in her attempts to escape her kidnappers when she finally meets her potential employer and hears the ultimatum he has to offer. Become the bodyguard for his sheltered daughter Shoko, or die brutally at the hands of the men who have already gotten started. You're never gonna believe which one she picks. Shoko is naive. She is pristine. She's taken from obligation to obligation like a thing instead of a person. She wears old clothes. She has no friends. She plays a part perfectly because she has to, because she's surrounded on all sides by disgusting, bloodthirsty men desperate to get her alone. So initially, Shoko's coldness is really pronounced towards Shindo, but as the weeks go on, they start to get more used to each other and form an unlikely bond, and they realize that they both find something fascinating about one another. This book is cinematic and intense. It's full of descriptive, kinetic writing that grabbed me from the first line. The stakes are very high. Shoko and Shindo face threats of sexual and physical violence basically at every turn. And I would like to be very clear to readers that rape is a constant threat, verbally or not, throughout the book. The writing, like I said, is descriptive and visceral. It is brutal and bloody and violent, and it has earned its many comparisons to the entire John Wick franchise, while also navigating the specific sexualized violence that John doesn't necessarily have to think about. All that being said, there's a certain softness with which this book approaches gender and sexuality and identity, and I really, really liked it. Shoko and Shindo are so very different that they realize they've never met someone like one another. So it's a novel experience to go to lunch and get coffee instead of driving to another etiquette class. It's also a novel experience because it is extremely risky and it makes my palms sweat with anxiety while these two learn how to flirt. Shindo and Shoko, for all their differences, they share a history of having their personalities, bodies, entire lives defined by the people around them, particularly the men around them. So this is a queer novella, but I am not going to assign any particular labels or titles because this book certainly doesn't, and that is part of where Shoko and Shindo are able to get some of their power back, in being free of definition after living lives so full of so much control. I think that this is a fascinating, quick read that really dumps you into the action, and then the stylistic writing elevates what is already a really cool thriller. So props to the writer, but also huge props to the translator for being able to capture what a cool, unique style Akira Otani has. It was intense and just like perfect for my action movie loving brain. So I wound up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, second to last, I am going to talk about Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin, and I am just gonna put the cover up here because I've gotten used to not holding books up. Know that this is the book. So this book had just arrived in a recent Pango order, and it was sitting on top of a stack of books to be added to my shelves, and then December 30th rolled around, and out of curiosity, I picked the book up off the top of the stack one of the times I passed it, and I read the first line. And then I took the book into the living room, and I finished the entire thing. I really like this quick little paragraph from the summary to kind of set up what the story is about, so I'm gonna read that to you. A young woman named Amanda lies dying in a rural hospital clinic. A boy named David sits beside her. She's not his mother. He's not her child. Together, they tell a haunting story of broken souls, toxins, looming environmental and spiritual catastrophes, and the ties that bind a parent to a child. So this book is a conversation, albeit a confusing one, because Amanda's awareness of reality fades in and out. She's not sure where she is or why she has to talk to David, but she does have to talk to him. David makes it clear that her story is infinitely important, especially the details that she hasn't thought to focus on. It is a dark, bizarre story, and I think enjoyment is going to vary strongly from reader to reader. The title is fitting. It 100% feels like you are caught in a fever dream, which gives the whole book a kind of unreliable element, like how much of what we are hearing is true, how much of what is going on around Amanda is actually happening. I almost want to describe the tone as frantic. We're thrown into a nightmarish, hallucinatory interrogation, and I think the lack of answers and the extremely anxious tone are not going to work for everyone. But I knew from basically the first page that this was exactly my kind of book. Not only on a first read, but on so many more rereads that I intend to do. Because I know that reading this book is going to be a completely new experience every time, so I'm preemptively looking forward to rereading it. I've been meaning to get to Samantha's work for years. I think I have every single English release of her books on my Goodreads TBR shelf, and this weird, entrancing little book has just confirmed for me even further that I need to move books like Little Eyes and Mouthful of Birds and Seven Empty Houses higher up the priority list when it comes to books I'm reading. Luckily, a couple of those are available at the library, and I have been tearing through the library books recently, so perhaps look forward to reviews of more of Samantha's work going forward. Any suggestions on which one I should try first? Think Mouthful of Birds is the one that I've had on my TBR for the longest, so that's currently the one that I'm leaning towards. I'd love to hear some, thoughts on that one. As far as Fever Dream, I loved this reading experience. It was unsettling. It was beautifully written. I wound up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. And you know what? This book is my validation for why I never make favorite book lists until it is January 1st. What if I find a new favorite a day and a half before 2024 ends? It's happened before and now it's happened again. December 30th and 31st reading can actually be so powerful. The last book that I'm going to talk about in this wrap-up is Coming Back by Jessie Zabarsky. This is a YA fantasy graphic novel with Sapphic representation, specifically. Words I want to use to describe this graphic novel: sweet, cozy, vague, pretty, magical. This is set in an isolated island community of only women, all with strict traditions and magic in their bones. To prove her value to Preet, the woman she loves, and to her community as a whole, non-magical Valissa sets off on a dangerous journey with no idea when she might be able to come back home, which is something that leaves both women alone for the first time in their relationship. In Valissa's absence, Preet breaks one of the community's most sacred laws and is banished from the only home she's ever known. And this graphic novel is meant to be a winding story about two women who are so desperate to prove their love and their value to one another that they just end up hurting each other in the process. This is a very light graphic novel in a lot of ways. It's very sparse. Not a lot of text, which means a lot is left open to interpretation. And we are following the characters over a very extended period of time, so we're kind of at a distance emotionally there as well. I think that this all makes for a nice story while not being a particularly memorable story. Like, of all the books I've talked about, this is the one that I read the most recently, and it is easily the book I remember the least about. There was so much story to cover, and we just weren't given very firm answers about, like, the world building, or the time span, or the implications. And those are just things that I have a harder time with in fantasy. I love answers. Answers are my favorite. Nightmarish, drug-induced dream books not included, I guess. There were a couple of emotional decisions in this book that were wild, and I am still not sure how we were supposed to take them, because the story is so metaphorical, and I would get caught up in, like, the allegory of understanding what this meant, and then something would happen that I'd be like, well, I just don't know at all what this is a metaphor for. And then there would be no text to help me understand at all. I really liked this art style. It was reminiscent of, like, Tilly Walden's work or Nate Stevenson's style, just simple but cozy and full of a really diverse range of characters. However, I just think that for the story that we got out of this book, I would much rather have spent my time reading one of Tilly's books or Nate's books. I don't know why I keep ending my wrap-ups recently with cute but forgettable sapphic graphic novels. Sapphic graphic novels? Ooh. Sapphic graphic novel. But now I feel like I have to continue a theme. Like, I'm recording this on the final day of February, so maybe I have a chance to fit in another just okay graphic novel. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. It was nice. Okay, y'all, those are the books that I read in 2024. We did it. We made it to the end. Obviously some tonal whiplash, but I was really into what I was reading for these 2 months, and I've been really excited about discussing these further with you guys. So be sure to let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of these. What did you think about these books? Has anyone else had just, like, a hell of a time explaining their relationship to Lee Mandello's writing? Is there a trope more difficult to explain the motivations for than fake dating? When am I going to read the next Sapphic graphic novel that rewires my brain and then lights it on fire in the best way? I think this might call for me to finally break into my copy of The Deep Dark. Also, friends, let me know how your reading has been going so far in 2025. It has been very uneven for me. Truly one of the more uneven starts to a reading year I've ever had, but you'll hear more about that in my next wrap-up. So if you're curious about that, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and maybe consider turning on notifications. It's something you could do. That way you won't miss my uploads while I attempt to create a schedule and the YouTube algorithm glares at me from the corner. Also, give this video a like if you found something new to read. That would be the best. Anyway, y'all, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in another one very soon. Bye!